them into Tai Chi or Bagua or Xingyi, or more advanced Qigong for that matter.
I see. Let's actually talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about sort of where heaven and earth fits in with the other practices. And for this, anybody can kind of chime in. If you're teaching heaven and earth or you practice it, let's just go through some of the big things that you focus on in heaven and earth as distinct from some of the other practices. Does anybody want to start us off with that stuff? When you do your heaven and earth, what are we focusing on here? And Eric, you can keep going if you like.
Well, somebody else must have something to say.
Yeah, Lucy, why don't you go ahead?
It's more actually a question, is that I've been doing a lot of Tai Chi recently.
Yeah.
And I was, just the other day, to be honest with you, I don't practice Marriage of Heaven and Earth all that often. And I was just doing a set or two the other day whilst I was waiting for a piece of toast to cook, as you do. And and then I was doing my Tai Chi afterwards, and I was suddenly, I guess, much more aware of the potential of putting some bending the bow into the Tai Chi. Mm-hmm. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that, perhaps?
Yeah, Eric, do you want to put that in context, and maybe we can then circle back around to it at the end? Specific, because as I understand it, and anybody else can chime in here, you want to be pretty comfortable with the bowing before you start to do any of that in your Tai Chi. But Eric, how would you qualify that?
Well, I'll back up a minute. For a long time, again, until this training we did in 2004, where he really started talking about the C curve and bending the spine in certain ways. He used to teach with heaven and earth, opening and closing the vertebrae or the spine and the plates of the skull, and then he sort of dropped that from the teacher training and said, really, that whole part of heaven and earth is a continuation of the Marriage of Heaven and Earth, but it's really more a part of Bend the Bow. And he's occasionally taught certain things about Bend the Bow and bowing the spine in Tai Chi. He has pretty consistently said that until your Tai Chi is very, very stable and until your Bend the Bow is pretty good, that he's never recommended trying to put it into Tai Chi, because in the Marriage of Heaven and Earth, or if you practice the simple Bend the Bow exercise, it's symmetrical, and both arms and both legs are doing the same thing. They're maintaining the same shape. But in any Tai Chi move, you've got usually a weighted leg and an unweighted leg, and you're forward or you're back or you're to the side, and then one arm is doing one thing and one arm is doing the other, and that creates or can create a variety of pressures on the spine, and that if you and so what he said pretty consistently is that if you start trying to do that without some fairly good control and understanding of what's going on in your body, it's easy to start to distort the spine rather than use it in an efficient way and make the practice healthy for yourself. Because in the advanced Bend the Bow, for instance, if somebody hasn't done it, he teaches techniques where by holding the hands and the arms in different positions, sometimes symmetrical and sometimes not, how you can actually target specific vertebrae, or you can create, or sometimes for people with scoliosis where they have a curvature in their spine, by having one hand up and doing something in one direction and the other hand down and going in a different direction, you can target that particular curvature and begin to unbind it. But you could really do the opposite of that to yourself if you weren't careful, where, let's say you were trying to bow the spine in brush knee and twist step, your upper hand and your lower hand, if you weren't careful, could create uneven pressures on the spine that might end up, causing you more problems.
Now, I also, it's worth pointing out here too, right, Eric, that we talk about bowing the spine from a really technical point of view. Working with the spinal bow in heaven and earth and working with the spinal bow and bend the bow means slightly different things in terms of the anatomy of it, right? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think it's a matter of degree or continuation myself, but in heaven and earth, the spinal bowing or encircling hands is really trying to access the spring of the spinal ligaments and getting the spine to bend in a unified fashion, and really as sort of one piece. But once you have that in bend the bow, you're still bending the spine externally. I suppose it would look pretty much the same, but you're working on opening and closing all of the vertebrae and the spaces between all of the vertebrae at the same time, which you're not really worried about or trying to focus on in the beginning levels in the marriage of heaven and earth.